a little bit through my journey into sustainable economy, because I wasn't always interested in this, of course. It really began when I moved to China for about 6 months. I was about 24 years old. I'm American. I grew up with the American dream. And in my bachelor's degree, I studied political science. And I kept hearing about the Chinese miracle, that the Chinese economy was growing double-digit percentage every year, 12% GDP growth this year, estimated to be 15 maybe next year, and that this GDP growth was development. This was a success story, and it was pulling people in China out of poverty. So when I finished my undergrad degree, I got the chance to go teach English in China. And I was really excited to see this developmental miracle firsthand in person. And this agency for this English schools placed me in a rural village. So I was in this rural village, the only foreigner around. It was a good thing that I spoke some Chinese. And what I saw there totally changed my view of what development is, of what the economy is, and the course of my life, really. So what did I see there? Well, it was just before the Beijing Olympics, and the cities were sending their factories, they were moving their factories out into the rural parts of China in order for the cities to look clean for all of the Olympics tourists. And in the village, near the village where I was living, they had put a few factories, a paper factory, an asphalt factory, and a few others. And these factories were just throwing their emissions, their pollution into the air and into the river nearby. And this river had been the lifeblood of this community for generations. And by the time I had gotten there, all of the fish had died. The river had become poisonous to the people. And the people were getting sick as well. And so for me, these stories of development and GDP growth and what does this mean on land, well, what I saw, what I experienced for 6 months living in this village as, again, the only foreigner, so it was really just my everyday reality, sort of made me start questioning this whole story, going back to the narratives that have been a thread throughout the day. So fast forward a few years, now I've gotten a master's degree in sustainability in Sweden. I've fallen in love with a Greek man. I find myself in Greece in 2009, just in time for the Greek crisis. I have good timing with these things. And so then I also start questioning the ability of the economy to fit within the planetary limits. This is something that kept coming up in my sustainability education, and just to be stable in economic terms, because experiencing this economic crisis, just as I was trying to enter the job market, shook my faith even more. So I decided to start looking more into this tension between the economy and the environment. Why does it always feel like some sort of trade-off? And we obviously cannot change the planet, the environmental limits, so we have to change our economy. And that's why when I got involved with the Post-Growth Institute, which is an international network of researchers and activists who are very passionate about going beyond the growth-based economy. And they're a member of the We All Alliance, actually. And with them, I started exploring. So one of the co-founders, Donnie McClurkin, came to the group with an idea one time. He had been seeing the emergence of businesses in Australia, where he was based, of not-for-profit businesses. And it was sort of a new animal, a new economic actor for us all. We hadn't really thought about this before. But he had a hunch that maybe this would be a key to going beyond the growth-based economy. So I started looking into this with him, and that's the research I've been doing for about the last 5 or 6 years, and with this PhD. And so what do I mean when I say the difference between not-for-profit and for-profit business? I've come to call this profit orientation of business. And this is where I'm going to show you some slides, or a slide. Basically, you can think of profit orientation of business as the nexus or the overlap between 3 important aspects of any business, and that's purpose, ownership, and investment. And I've come to see these things as a package deal, that we can't really talk about purpose without talking about ownership and investment, and vice versa. And so the difference between for-profit and not-for-profit, let's just stay on this level. So a business is always started with a purpose, Traditional for-profit businesses are often started with the purpose of financial gain for their owners, and that's the return on investment that they're waiting for. Nowadays, you can also find a social benefit purpose. So then we ask which purpose is for whom. And like I just said, the financial gain is for the private owner. So for-profit involves private ownership, whereas if you go back, so not-for-profit businesses are not allowed to have financial gain as a primary purpose. They must have a social benefit purpose. And then that is for a collective group of people. There's no private ownership of not-for-profit businesses. So we take it a step further. Are there financial rights? With for-profit businesses that are started for financial gain for private owners, those private owners have something we call, in legal terms, financial rights, which means that they have the right to take money and assets from the company. Not-for-profit businesses, on the other hand, do not have financial rights. And I'm saying all of this, I'm trying to make this clearer for you because on the level of the business, it's interesting, right? But what I've found and what I'm doing with my research is really unpacking how these elements of a business model, of a business legal framework, create dynamics at the system level. So we've heard a lot about systems thinking. So these create dynamics at the level of the entire economy. So with financial rights, with for-profit business, you're allowed to have equity-based investment, and that's part of the financial rights. So equity represents a bit of ownership in a business. So you have private owners with equity-based investment for the purpose of financial gain. Whereas with not-for-profit businesses, they cannot have equity because they don't have financial rights or private ownership. So not-for-profit businesses are limited to debt and donation-based investment. And that circles back to purpose. Those with equity-based investment in for-profit businesses, you have unlimited returns on investment. Because that will make the owners more money, right? You don't want to limit the returns on investment. They can get richer and richer all the time. Whereas because not-for-profit business has the purpose of social benefit, there are limits to the returns on investment because we don't want financial gain crowding out the social benefit purpose. And so that's the key difference between for-profit business, which most of us are used to thinking of just business, and not-for-profit business. So I want to make this a little bit more concrete for you because we're often used to thinking of not-for-profits or non-profits as charities or foundations. And what I'm talking about is a slightly different animal. Those are great, but I'm talking about not-for-profits that actually generate most of their revenue or all of their revenue through the sale of goods and services. And that's what allows us to think of an entire economy as not-for-profit, which is where I'm going next. So one example of a not-for-profit business, again, to make it more concrete, would be if you're familiar with the UK, there's like the YHA, the Youth Hostels Association. They have the social benefit purpose of getting people out of the city and into nature. But instead of just relying on grants and donations and philanthropy to support that purpose, they run a business. So they sell the service of accommodation and recreation, and all of their profit at the end of the year, their financial surplus, goes back into the mission of helping people get out of the cities, usually in the form of youth programs that get kids out of London into the countryside that they might not otherwise have that opportunity. So that's an example of a not-for-profit business. Now I want to take you more into what are the dynamics on the level of the economy that are created by these different frameworks, these differences in purpose, ownership, and investment. So with a for-profit economy, due to the purpose, the ownership, and the investment, unlimited returns on equity-based investment, we can expect to see some of the things that have been mentioned today. For instance, consumerism. The financial gain purpose and the unlimited returns on equity-based investment drive production and advertisements that promote consumerism, a culture of consumerism, telling us we all need to buy more all the time, as well as planned obsolescence when goods and services are designed to be outdated before they need to, just to drive more consumption, because more consumption means more profits, which fulfills the purpose of those companies. so consumerism is one of these vicious cycles that we can see in the dynamics. Another one is inequality, because the investment has these unlimited returns on the money put in. That goes to the owners, right? So that goes to a specific group of people in the economy, and it's usually a very small group of people in the economy who are owners of the businesses. So you've got wealth accumulation and concentration in the hands of the owners. And again, it's not that they're bad people. This is the way we've designed our economic institutions. At the same time, there's a built-in incentive to suppress wages. So you have wages being stagnated, which kind of characterizes the global economy right now, as the IMF puts it, and accumulation by owners. So those two things create worsening inequality, which we're seeing. The third vicious loop, so we've got consumerism, inequality. The third one touches on what Johanna was talking about earlier, which is political capture. I use the term political capture, which was coined by Oxfam, I believe, a few years ago, which refers to businesses having undue political influence or undue influence on political processes. So we've all heard about these large corporations lobbying against taxes, lobbying for subsidies, and there's a natural incentive built into these legal structures to cut costs and increase revenue, and that's why they do that lobbying. What would change if we could imagine an entire economy made of not-for-profit businesses? And this was the exercise that I've been doing. If you have an entire market economy made of businesses with a social benefit purpose, collective ownership, and limits on the returns on investment, what you could expect is not this systemic drive for consumerism. There's still the potential of consumerism, but it's not built into the system the way that the for-profit system has. The loop of inequality, this vicious loop of inequality, basically disappears because you don't have private owners to accumulate and concentrate wealth anymore, and there's no inbuilt incentive to suppress wages. Likewise, the vicious cycle of political capture would not be expected either, because that interacts so much with inequality and the concentration of wealth and power. So we could imagine that a not-for-profit economy would be a lot better for sustainability. It would also maybe align better with things like environmental taxes, because all businesses would have a social benefit purpose. But it's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea that would solve everything. Oh, and it's time for me to wrap up. So the best way to think of this is that it's necessary but not sufficient for a sustainable post-growth economy. And I'll just link now to, if you want to learn more about this, I have co-authored a book with the Post-Growth Institute. A working draft is up at this howonearth.us. You can find it in the overview section, or you can email me. Thank you very much for your attention.